shorter version of the Fertility Podcast where we invite you to grab yourself a brew, and we're going to be sharing kind of general musings from the everyday.
And we're also going to be talking about things that are happening in the fertility world. So it could be things that we've read, things we've seen on social media, or it could be events that are happening.
Yep, as well as answering your questions, because I have Kate at my beck and call. Well, not really, but I have Kate available to answer your questions, and we want you to keep sending them in because there's no stupid questions ultimately, are there?
No, there's no silly questions, so we're happy to answer anything.
I'll tell you something that I actually had seen about. I had read an article about the likelihood of fish oil being good for sperm health, and I then tweeted some of the male fertility experts that I follow on Twitter. And actually, there's been an interesting piece of research that's been done, and it's been commented on by some of these fertility experts. So I'm talking about Professor Alan Pacey and also Dr. Kevin McElhaney, who we have as an upcoming guest on this podcast.
Yep.
Professor Alan Pacey has previously been a guest on this podcast.
And he is the guru of all things sperm.
Well, they're all pretty guru-esque. And one of the things that he had talked about in the findings of basically whether fish oil may have a positive impact on young men's testicular function is what it was about. They're saying that it looks at the key hormones involved in making sperm. This is what Alan says. And he says it gives an additional dimension. And he says the fact that they looked at healthy men from the general population, it was military recruits. It makes the study quite interesting because it rules out many other health co-founders that could influence the result, and that men would not have been actively looking to improve their sperm health, which is different to if they were maybe in a fertility clinic. So I suppose the argument could be that it was a good sample being the opposite word. And it basically, it talks about what it can do. But it does say before men or their partners reach for the cod liver oil, it's important to note that the study is not a randomized controlled trial. So we can't conclude absolutely that it's fish oil that was having an improvement. There's quite a different amount of comments from various male fertility specialists. So I do want to share this bit from the Science Medical Centre. People can have a read, because I know that when it comes to male fertility, there's always interest in any new conversations. And I think that it might be something that we get the guys on to talk about more as well.
It'd be interesting to hear. Also be interested to see when they looked at the age of the men. If it was military recruits, then they're obviously quite young.
Yeah.
Therefore, they're probably 17, 18. But I'd be interested to know how you get a 17-year-old or 18-year-old to take a regular dose of cod liver oil or omega-3. You know, how do you do that? I'd be interested to hear.
Yeah.
I just can't see that we would get young men to take it.
Yeah,
but
and it's depending at how much ahead of the needing your
exactly.
Is it a preventative rather than a curative? I suppose
exactly.
We need to understand. There's something else that I shared on Twitter, because it's always interesting to see the conversations on the different platforms, and people are very vocal, especially on Twitter. And obviously, you can kind of share links with a bit more ease. And there was an article that my mum actually brought my attention to, which was in the Daily Mail, my least favourite publication, I have to say. And it basically, the headline was, this is Dr. Max Pemberton, who is an NHS psychiatrist. Now, when it comes to scaremongering and the tabloids, tell me what you think of this. This is the headline. It's controversial, yes, but I believe we should ban IVF babies.
What, ban IVF babies or ban IVF?
Ban IVF treatment.
Wow. Okay, so why?
So
What's
the context was about, in essence, the need for more babies to be adopted. That just adopt conversation. We're going to be talking more about adoption, actually. This bit was quite interesting. He talked about how there is a growing shortage of sperm donors. And there was this conversation within the Journal of Medical Ethics, which was proposing a scheme by which sperm is obtained by the bodies of dead men. And it talks about how it can be harvested from corpses by electrical stimulation of the prostate. And they're talking about if, for example, they've signed a donor card, that sperm donation is no different from organ donation. And his argument was that it is, because donating an organ doesn't result in another human coming into the world. And then it talked about the psychological impact of a child who's conceived in this way, who might then look to go and seek out their father.
Absolutely. science gone mad, I think.
That part was fascinating in the thought
and scary.
And scary. But to then move on to this link between adoption and fertility treatment, which, like I say, we'll be talking in more detail, but we have talked about it in the past, and we know that so much more needs to be explained in this conversation. But yeah, that's what I found in the papers recently.
Well, that's what a controversial topic that is, for sure, and how that could be really upsetting.
And if you want to see some of the responses that people made to Dr. Max Pemberton on my Twitter feed, it's just @FertilityPoddy, because there were some quite angry people. And that's the brilliant thing about Twitter, is people being able to kind of vent, not at me, but I'd put a disclaimer about my decision to share the article. But it does frustrate me when there are those ridiculous headlines.
100%. And we've seen quite a few over the recent years, I think, of those types of real... Yeah. I'm lost for words, actually. I'm a bit stunned.
That's what I try to do every now and again, is throw something at you.
Thank you.
We're talking about the kind of way that we are, I suppose, susceptible to outside influences, especially in this teapot, because we've got a really interesting little snippet of a chat coming up with a lady called Antonia, talking about targeted advertising and what you need to be aware of when it comes to being online and maybe doing a search and then being harassed by whatever that was you were looking at, especially if it might be baby related and that's not where you're at all. So have a listen to Antonia.
So, I mean, my story was about 10 years ago. I'm trying to conceive, and at the time I was feeling quite alone. I think I was quite surprised. You hear a lot of people say the same thing now, but it was only when I started to sort of talk that other people would start to sort of say, oh yes, I had the same, or kind of, and share their experiences. And I just remember feeling massively let down and alone. So at the time, the way that I had sort of dealt with it was by blogging. We were overseas at the time, and kind of allowed me to sort of express things that were on my mind, issues that I was sort of seeing. And that's kind of how I ended up sort of getting into sort of the area, but, you know, sort of balancing with trying to sort of do a job and work full time as well. But it's something that I felt quite strongly about, because I used to think, well, I'm not, you know, I don't think I'm a stupid person, but there's so much information that I just didn't have. And how did that happen?
And where did you then get support from?
So it was a lot of forums online, Googling on the internet, and then that's how I came across sort of certain things like Fertility Network UK. But at the time I was looking as well a lot at the US. I was basically living overseas, so kind of looking at stuff like Resolve and stuff like that. It was kind of looking at what people were doing. And at that point in time, 10 years ago, it was a lot of blogs. I mean, now I see it's a lot of Instagram. It's a different sort of community, but there was blogging back then, that people were kind of talking and sort of sharing what their experience is.
Well, the reason that I was keen to talk with you, Antonia, and wanted Kate to kind of just pick your brain a bit, was because of a really interesting post that you had shared about targeted advertising. And it was something that I hadn't really thought of in terms of online. I mean, I'm very cautious in terms of the podcast advertising. We've had sponsorship in the past, and I've always been very, very particular that it's only things that would be of interest and relevance to you if you're trying to conceive, and nothing that could be in any way triggering, because there was one point where the podcast had moved to a different host and I couldn't guarantee that you wouldn't get an advert for Mothercare or for a family car, and so I had to move it away. So when I saw your post, I was like, gosh, I've not even thought about it becoming this thing that is actually really affecting you when you are so vulnerable. So just tell me a bit about what it was that you posted, and then we can talk a bit more about what people can do.
Yeah, well, I posted it for two reasons, because I saw people talking about it in articles on the internet, where people were saying, oh, you know, I've started seeing adverts for sort of baby related items, and it's really kind of upsetting me, and I don't really want to see this. And also some talking to friends who were actually sort of saying that was their experience. I mean, her friend sort of showed me, said, look, I just kind of did one search, and now I'm in Facebook, I'm getting all these kind of baby related content. You know, it would be not just adverts sometimes, but it's the suggestions of like clips of babies dancing. And she was just like, I'm okay, I can deal with it now. But, you know, it's really tough. And so because I'd been sort of working in the privacy space for a few years, I thought I can see a need here to sort of give people some tips on how to try and sort of navigate it. And I know it's a tricky area. You're not going to get it 100% perfect in terms of excluding it. But if you can sort of try and share some tips that people can sort of just try and raise their awareness and start to sort of do things that can help themselves, really.
Because it chases you everywhere, doesn't it? I mean, I know at the moment I'm looking for some cabin luggage for a little trip my husband and I are going on. And I've put that into my phone. I've been searching for it. And now suddenly, the minute I go onto Facebook, there it all is, and you can't, I feel like it's chasing me, actually. And it's one specific company, and their bags are very expensive. I'm not going to buy from them, but they are really chasing me. And you can't, how do you get away from it?
Well, I think it's difficult because this is a high income area for them. And so, they kind of see the opportunities. And at the moment, I don't think the technology is quite there so that you can just do one click and basically remove it all. But there are things that you can do. So you can basically go into your browser settings and so do block certain cookies and do certain blocks so that you stop to get some of this advertising. I mean, the regulators in Europe have been brilliant, and you'll start to see some of these pop-ups now that come up and sort of give you warnings about cookies. And it actually is worth spending some time and sort of just looking on there. And if you can, click just the functional ones and not all of the others.
Because so often I'm guilty. I'm just like, accept, move on, and then you just don't know what it's doing on your computer.
And if you actually look, you'll break it down into categories. And so the first sort of top will be sort of a functional performance, but the others are much more related to sort of targeting. And those are the ones you can quite legitimately untick and say that you don't want. But it's very difficult. I mean, you're just wanting, that's why I say it's not perfect, because you want an easy life, don't you? You want to be able to just click on the internet, go to buy your item. You don't want this to happen.
But how easy is it to do that? Because I'm just thinking of a pop-up that comes up on my phone, talks about cookies, allow, disallow. So if I want the website to work, what I'm looking at, the page that I'm looking at, then I'll click allow. But if I don't click allow, in my experience in the past is I've then been kicked off that site, or I can't access it in the way that I'd want to. So from that pop-up, how do you find all those other alternatives that you can say the functional? How do you find that?
They're moving. That you won't find that every company or every website does that, but you'll find that they are moving in that direction.
Okay.
Right. So that's the thing. And I mean, that is kind of the recommendations and the kind of the guidance from the regulators. So they are starting to move in that way. Go into your browser settings, to be honest, is kind of one of the better ways of doing it, because it will block all of them, and then you may sometimes find that that sometimes you can't go on a particular website or finish a particular transaction, and you've got to override it. The reason I say it's not easy is because if you're using multiple browsers, you've got to remember each one browser is slightly different. It's hard because when you're trying to conceive, there's lots of issues that you're already in your head, and it's kind of like this is one more problem. But there are things that you can be doing to try and make it easier for you. And there are some browsers like DuckDuckGo and stuff where you can go incognito. People can try and use those. Again, I don't think they're entirely, going to be 100%, but that may be a way to go. When you're in social media, there are options in there for you to be able to sort of not be banded into certain categories. So you might find that you've been put in a parenting category, and you can sort of remove that. So you can do things, but you have to be alive to it. That's the thing, is that you've got to be active in that area.
This is why we wanted to talk with you, really, to just heighten people's awareness about the fact that you can regain control. And we will post some links, because you shared a piece that Fertility Network had shared, and within that there was some interesting links about ads.info and youronlinechoices.com. Again, I'll put the links to them in the show notes. And you were talking about your work in privacy, Antonia. Do you think with this topic, when we are becoming more connected in a place like Instagram, because it's such a supportive community, that we're therefore making ourselves more vulnerable in terms of our privacy, because we don't necessarily know how to turn these things off for all these advertising?
I think it's hard, isn't it? Because people share, and it's good to share. So I don't think you're making yourself more vulnerable. I actually think that it can be good, because people talking about these topics, it raises awareness. We can try and sort of really berate the companies that are doing this advertising, but actually, if we can raise awareness and go, look, you need to be sensitive to these issues, they can start to listen and start to think about how they kind of operate. Because oftentimes it feels like they're taunting you, but actually they don't know who you are. To them, you're just XYZ 1, 2, 3. You've fallen into a category, and therefore it kind of goes, this person is 18 to 30 or whatever. We will serve them these ads. And behind the scenes, there can be bidding. So then they're kind of bidding to kind of get that, prime real estate to serve you that ad. But if we can make them understand these things, then I think, I actually think the whole community can get smarter. I think that's a problem with the age that we're living in. Things are moving at different paces, and things don't always necessarily keep up at the same rate, which makes it hard.
And I agree with you. And you're saying, you don't want to be, you don't want to be hiding yourself away, because actually in the fertility arena we've just started opening up conversations and sharing is a really good thing. So we don't want to suddenly feel that we can't share, but it's just that fine balance of not feeling that you can share, but also then that you're being targeted in an appropriate way.
It can feel very personal, but sometimes it's not really that personal. It's just the way that you've been profiled.
Yeah.
I guess if we can, by putting this out there, help you realize that if that does happen and it pops up, then you can instantly kind of do something about it. And even if you're still seeing some of them, you're kind of self-protecting a bit because you've heard it talked about a bit more. It's that awareness, isn't it, that we know that ads are targeted. I just hadn't really related it into being so kind of susceptible to the kind of trigger element. I mean, it instantly made me think, if you've been pregnant and you've been looking at baby stuff and then you lose the baby and then you're being targeted, just that point in time just being so painful. So hopefully if we can raise the awareness of it, and even if it's getting somebody else in, call out to your support network, say, come and sort this out on my computer for me, I can't even think about it, but even here's the article to find out what to do.
Exactly. And it's just really just trying, or just say somebody, can you give me a hand, or kind of just kind of go, oh, what can I do, and do certain things, to try and sort of shield yourself. We're always going to see advertising. You open the paper and you're going to see advertising. What you're needing to do is to try and remove that layer where it feels more personal to you, so that you haven't been put into a profile category and kind of go, exactly that scenario that you've just said. One minute you were looking at baby stuff, and then suddenly you've lost your baby. You don't want to be seeing that, but of course they don't know that's happened. So you've got to find a way to sort of manage it.
It's taking responsibility for yourself, really, isn't it? And
a bit, yeah. I think it's joint. I think companies have got to be responsible as well.
Well, let's hope with the developments of AI, there can be some other awareness that happens. Antonia, thank you so much for shedding light on it and for coming and explaining it a bit more.
No, you're welcome. I hope it's helpful.
I think that's really useful, don't you, to know that we can not maybe phase it out totally, but we can have more control. And maybe you need to do that about the luggage that you're being chased by.
Yeah, I think I do. Yeah, I think having those practical steps, and we'll make sure on the show notes we put down exactly what you can do to hopefully minimise it. Never get rid of it, never eradicate it completely, but minimise it so you don't feel hounded. And yeah, I will take that advice and make sure I'm not hounded by cabin luggage anymore.
Now, we've not answered your questions in this episode of the Tea Break Pod, which is something that we are doing just because we want to keep this kind of in that 10-minute wrap. Might be heading towards 15, this one, but do send your questions through to info@thefertilitypodcast.com, and Kate will do her best to answer them next time. For now, do get in touch. You can follow me at FertilityPoddy
and me at Your Fertility Journey.
And we love hearing what you think of our Tea Break Pod, so do subscribe in your favourite podcast app and rate and review and share, of course. And normal podcast will resume next week.